Very excited. Today we have with us Kevin Murphy, and we are actually going to be talking about how you can get your kids more confident and raise more confident kids through teaching art, or actually, it's just a teaching method that Kevin Murphy uses with his students. And he is so amazing, you guys. This is something we all want for our kids as parents. We all want them to be more resilient, more confident, and when you accomplish something that's so amazing that you didn't think you could do, that you thought talent was what you needed, and you really figured it out, that is such an accomplishment that you can carry throughout the rest of the areas of your life. And that is something that's undeniably what we want for our kids. So I'm super excited to share Kevin with you today because honestly, I can't imagine. I was telling him earlier how his students feel after they accomplish this massive amazingness that they come out with this product, this painting that's just amazing, and do something that they never thought they could do before, or maybe they thought they could do something similar but didn't realize it could be so incredible. And I had this gif in my email that went out this morning that was like this teenage girl. She was just, yeah, I got this. And that's how I feel his students are doing, because it's just so amazing to be able to have accomplished something you didn't think you could do, and pulling from that, you can carry that confidence throughout the rest of your life. I know that that is something I've done as an athlete, something I've done as a teacher, something I've done as just through lots of different struggles as a business owner. And my having those accomplishments is something that kids can draw on forever and adults can draw on forever. So I know my son does that with his martial arts and his scouts, and it's just so amazing. But I really love how Kevin teaches his students in a way that overcomes a misnomer, a myth, if you will. He says that talent is what you need to be an artist. And I feel like art is the medium that is is so talent heavy that everybody thinks that they have to be talented, they have to have this gift, they have to be, oh, I'm just not an artist sort of thing. And that's so what Kevin overcomes with his students. So Kevin, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. Can you please share with us a little bit about just why you love helping kids and adults, because I know you teach adults too, why you love helping them so much overcome the idea that, oh, I'm not talented, and be able to create something so magical. You guys, I've seen his students' products and they are magical, if no other word. They are magical. It is phenomenal. It's mind blowing. And I can only imagine, looking at that, knowing you did that, what kind of confidence that gives you. So, Kevin, what brings you into this world? Because you're already an amazing artist yourself.
Yeah, so I got into art when I was young. I grew up very poor. I lived in the Bronx in a relatively dangerous neighborhood. And my parents insisted that me I have 3 brothers. They insisted that to keep us out of trouble, that we be involved in something in our downtime. Weekends were never just doing our own thing. And so, I wasn't interested in a lot of the team sports that were offered, things like Little League. And so I like drawing a little bit. I wasn't known in my group of friends as the artist. There were like 5 of us, and I was probably the 4th in the pecking order for artists in our group. And, but I took some art classes, and, I mean, I was probably like 10 years old, and it's not that I fell in love with it, but, it was okay. And then from that time till I graduated high school, I dabbled a little here and there. It wasn't a focus of mine. It wasn't, again, you hear this word talent. I didn't have any talent. And even now I look back after a career that spans over 3 decades, I look back at the work I was doing when I was younger, when people were saying I was talented, and for the life of me, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I know what I'm looking at. I'm not confused about it at this stage. And so what I think they saw was that I was patient while I worked, and I paid attention to details. I paid attention to what I was doing. My mind wasn't wandering. I was focused. And those are really the prerequisites for being able to elevate yourself anywhere from a hobbyist to a professional in the arts. Attention to detail and patience in the work. You can leave the studio and have your road rage incidents while you're sitting in traffic, but while you sit in front of the easel, you have to be patient. And so you could say that there's a gift in that because patience is it's a big thing. And most of us don't have it, or we have it for some things and not for others. And so if we can find the things where that we have patience for, those are probably places that we are set up for success if we follow those paths. But for me, I grew up with very little. Both of my parents, they believed that it was more important for there to always be a parent at home when we were home. And so my father worked; he drove a taxi, and my mother was home most of the time. She eventually got a job as a school aide, so she was working in the school we went to the hours that we were there. So she'd be home when we got home from school. And I imagine four sons roaming the streets of the Bronx. Probably, my parents were probably terrified of that as an idea. And so for me, when I finally I got out of high school, I barely graduated. School was not a good fit for me. And we're talking about homeschooling here. It's a one size fits all, and there's very little deviation from their path. You'll do it their way, and it doesn't matter if you are the right fit. Um, I my IQ is 126. I tested it many, many times years and years ago. I know where my IQ falls. I have several friends that went to the Bronx High School of Science, which is a very prestigious school. Average IQ there is like 135. So it's very hard to get in. All of my friends for that group were in Mensa. I know what my IQ is because I tried to get into Mensa and I couldn't. So I'm not dumb. My brain works well. I shouldn't say I'm not dumb. My brain works well. It processes data well. And so I just wasn't the right fit for the way they were teaching. And because of that, I grew up hearing from first grade all the way till I graduated high school that I was lazy and I was unfocused and I was undriven and I slept in class and I'm just all of these things. I just looked I had no prospects. And so I graduated high school with a 68 average, which is 3 points above failing. And without any real options, I got into the carpenters union and I became a carpenter. I worked in the city, working in skyscrapers. I did that for about 3.5 years. And there's a lot there, but like in that time, I taught myself how to read because I could barely read when I graduated high school. I could read about 6 pages an hour in a typical mass market book. I eventually wound up taking speed reading courses and I educated myself. By the time I finished 3.5 years of construction, I'd read over 1,000 books. And in that window of time, I fell in love with the artwork on the science fiction and fantasy books. And I decided one day when I went into work, I didn't want to do construction anymore. I was good at it and I liked the work, but I, I I didn't like the cold winter mornings and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning when everyone else was smart enough to be sleeping. It's not a life I wanted looking down the road. And so I packed up my tools, gave them to one of the apprentices, and I left. I decided I was going to become a book cover illustrator. And I didn't know what the odds were, but you know, you have a better chance of being a neurosurgeon. And so I I just went out on my own and started trying to figure out how to do that. Again, I went to the School of Visual Arts, which was the top illustration school in the country at the time. I went for one semester. And again, school, just the platform, it just wasn't the right fit for me. It was just a total waste of my time. And so I decided I've just got to figure out how to do it on my own. And that's basically what I did. About 18 months later, I found myself with my first book cover commission. My first commission was for a major publisher in New York. And I spent the next 8 years doing book covers. And I had promised myself early on, when I got to a place where I understood how it all worked, I would reach back and help other people behind me who were in the same place as me, that they couldn't find resources. That they were cut off from that potential. And I didn't think of it so grandly as I do today. But it was just an idea, like share what you learn. Like, I've been very lucky over the years, whenever I've not known how to do something and I need that information, the person I needed showed up into my life and they were generous and shared. What I find is, and I've always said, like, my luck runs in that I always meet the people I need to meet. And for the early years of my career, I met the people I needed to learn from. The last 20 years, my luck has been that I have met the people who have needed me. And the people in the earlier years prepared me to be able to be helpful. And so, but getting back to this, I've been a professional painter for 32 years now, and I worked as a commercial illustrator. I have about 300, maybe 350 published works, everything from book covers. I've done religious greeting cards. I've done artwork for Camel cigarettes of all companies. LucasArts with Jurassic Park and Star Wars. I did a cover for the Rolling Stones. So I'm pretty well credentialed in that field. And at one point, I realized that digital art was going to push its way in, and I didn't want to do digital art. I like the traditional stuff. So I moved out of that. I started a publishing company um, with a couple of my friends and who worked in the industry. I handled the art department. We did about 150 titles, including Game of Thrones. So we worked on the limited edition Game of Thrones for almost 6 years. And then in that time, I started doing portraiture. So I was doing, heirloom portraits for people. And I built a career, spanned almost 20 years doing it. I don't do it much anymore. Every once in a while, I'll take a job, but it's very rare. I only do it through referral. I don't take cold calls. I have other things going on. About 15 years ago, so kind of step back just a little. I have two daughters. I have one's 19, one's 22. And so because I was doing portrait work, I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule. So when my first daughter was born, I became a stay-at-home dad. And I did that for almost 6 years. I did that until my oldest daughter was ready to go to school. And then I started looking around trying to figure out, well, where was I going to go? I was still doing portrait work, but the industry requires it's demanding. And so I didn't want to be out of town like for a couple of days every week for the year. I enjoyed being home too much with my daughters. And so I decided to open a school. I'd always wanted to do this, but I decided I'd open a school. And part of the reason for opening the school and then expanding into other things like the online program and everything else is that, you know, if not for art, an industry that most people would argue leads to starvation. If not for art, I would be a construction worker. Nothing wrong with that, but it's a hard life. It's a hard life and it has a hard limit on what you can make or what you can earn. My daughters live 8 minutes north of Princeton. They've had an extraordinarily privileged life. They've never needed something and not had access to it. Wanting things is different, but needing things. And, my children have just, we've been blessed. And I think that when you find yourself in a place like I found myself, I mean, every parent understands what they want to be able to do for their kids. To be able to go to sleep each night and know that my kids, I'd never have to worry about them. They're good kids and financially they'll be okay because of the things that I've built. And again, I've worked for all of this, but there's luck in it. Like it just doesn't just fall out of the sky. Some things do. You work
Well,
hard, but
what I'm hearing you say too, though, Kevin, is so transformational because if you think you've said, people show up in your life, and this is a huge, huge, huge point for everyone, that when the student is ready, the mentor will appear. And that is very, very true throughout your life. And I mean, you might think you're ready, but maybe you're not ready yet. But when you're really ready, the mentor does appear in your life. And then also, you took ownership of your education. That's something that I talk about a lot. That's something I teach parents how to implement into their homeschool culture, is how to have your kids develop into people that take ownership of your education, and that is huge because you've done that throughout your life. And now with your students, that is definitely something that you've implemented. Because I remember when we were talking before, you were mentioning something about frictionless education. Can you explain to me
yes.
a little bit what that is? I just love that.
Yeah. So for me, let me just kind of finish my
Oh yeah,
practical.
go ahead, sorry.
So basically, for me, because of all of the things that have come to me through the arts, I feel responsible to share it. And so I, for some reason, I have been able to, because of the path that I've taken. In many cases, I've had to reinvent the wheel, figure out how things work at a microscopic level because I didn't have teachers, and because of that, I'm in a unique position to teach others. I don't
Absolutely.
teach how something works, I teach why it works. If you understand that, the how becomes easy. How to do something, that's easy. it's easy to replicate. But if you can, right, it's the feeding, it's the giving somebody a fish or teaching them how to fish, right? I can catch a fish for you, or I can show you how fishing works. And not to just,
Absolutely.
throw a hook out into the water, but to say this lure catches this type of fish, but that type of fish is not in this water. You have to go over there. See these things. This is how you'll know those fish are available. That's the kind of the underlying things is really what I get down to in the way that I teach. And so, but for me, it's a responsibility to share this. Um,
Yeah.
and I take that seriously. The idea that maybe if I can have an impact in a single life and change a life the way that art has changed, all the things that I've had changed my life, the trajectory that I was on, everything that I've sacrificed in time and energy and to build this program will have been worth it.
Well, I
Um,
think you have. I think it's remarkable what your students are coming out with and the confidence that they have to take into the rest of their life.
yeah. So getting back to frictionless education. So there's a couple of things. Like I grew up, I have an older brother. I'm the second oldest. My older brother is a PhD in computer science. He's the chair of a department at a university. In addition to that, he chairs the tenure committee and he chairs the finance committee. My brother is a genius. He was an incredible athlete. In high school, he was a baseball player, but in high school, he was being scouted by professional teams. All around, flawless, brilliant, athletic, just everything. And imagine growing up behind that and going to school and not fitting in and being told you were lazy. My parents would hear this. He's very smart, but he's lazy. Very smart. And it infuriated my parents. Why don't you just try more? Right. And it was like, I don't belong here. This is not the right fit for me. And it wasn't until I got into doing construction. Well, I wrestled when I was in high school and I excelled at that. And like anybody who's wrestled or knows about wrestling, there is no sport more demanding. There's no
Yeah.
activity more demanding. And I excelled at it. I had a good mentor. And then I got out and I did construction and I excelled at that. I just worked hard. I found it interesting. I love the idea of going in and having a concrete floor and leaving at the end of the day and having a finished, like I did floors, I did a few things, but to finish a day's work at the end of the day and be able to look back and see what you'd accomplished. I really like that. And when I got into art, I saw the same thing. Like I could make a painting and then it was done. And then I could go into a bookstore and see it on a shelf. And it's like that's how I needed that. I needed to see those successes in order to be driven forward. If I went too long learning a thing and seeing no growth from it, I would become bored and go look for something else. And so I didn't stay in most things or the things like in school, I wasn't paying attention. You go 5 or 6 days in a row and the same topic and it's just droning on while the teachers wait for the lowest common denominator in the room to make sense of it. It wasn't a good fit for me. And I didn't know anything. I was just a kid. I was just, this is boring. I'm falling asleep here. So for me, building an education, the idea of it is to create something that is frictionless, that there's no place where you fail. Now you have to do the work, but if you do the work, there's no place to get hooked up and caught and tangled up. And that requires giving an education in its simplest terms, really getting to the meat of the matter and not muddying the waters with unnecessary things. And so as an example, so in art, if you speak to the writings of all of the old masters, they will say that human anatomy is a fundamental skill. Perspective is a fundamental skill, but I can say that neither one of those things exist in abstract art. And you don't need to have much of that if you're doing kind of impressionist art. You need less of it. It's only when you start getting more into realism. And so they're not fundamentals as far as I'm concerned. They're second tier tools if you're going to paint figures or if you're going to draw cityscapes. And so I dug into this as I was trying to figure out the education to get down to, well, what is everything constructed from? And I boiled it down that the entire world. Now you have to understand, like cognitive science, which is a field that's been expanding, maybe it's about 40, 50 years now. I think in the 70s is really where they started to dig into cognitive science and try to make sense of things. And it's really boomed recently because they're able to scan the brain while they're doing things and make sense of where things are being processed. But utilizing some of the information that's been gleaned through that field, we can break down how the brain So a third of your brain is dedicated to breaking down visual stimulation. So what is your brain doing? What is it looking for? And if you understand those things, or at least as we understand them now, you can then build a system of making art that works hand in hand with that visual processing. Now, to learn all of that stuff by yourself is ridiculous. The whole idea is that somebody puts together an education that doesn't have to explain the cognitive science, but it's built in. It's baked into the education. So how you break things down, right? So a great example is artists look at the world, an untrained or improperly trained artist, as far as I'm concerned, will look at something and, like, let's say they're doing a painting in grayscale or a drawing in grayscale, and they will try to make sense of the image as to how dark or light something is. But the brain doesn't care about how dark or light it is. It utilizes, is something in the light or is something in shadows? Those are two very different things. Now, shadows are darker and lights are lighter, but they are not dark and light. They're shadows and lights. In those two categories, that single difference dramatically alters the trajectory of your growth as an artist. And if you
That's
start with
fascinating.
shadows and lights, it's a dizzyingly vertical process developing your skills. And if you're doing shadows and lights, you just kind of creep along, hoping someday to get where you're going. And it's a simple change. But cognitive science tells us your brain uses shadows for certain pieces of data and lights for other. And our eyes only take in light. Our eyes don't see objects, but only the light bouncing off of them. Our brain creates the image that we think we see. And so understanding that process, and why the brain is doing what it's doing. And again, not to get into all of that stuff. I could go on for hours about it
Of
because
course.
it's very interesting to me.
It's
But the idea,
fascinating.
yeah, but the idea is that learning to make art is not about pushing around, like for painting, pushing around colored mud with a hairy stick. It's a place for thinking people. You have to engage and be thoughtful while you work. There's a lot of things to understand in order to be able to master this. And
That's a really
if it
good
can be
point.
given to you in a way that is simple and digestible, one piece, chew it, break it down, digest it, then give the next piece on top of that. Never two things at a time. And in fact, I have a video. Like we'll give you the link later, but in fact, I'll do it. It's evolveartist.com/HS. And if you go there, there's a video. It's an 8-minute video called This or That. And the program, it shows how an image is broken down using just 4 questions and then this or that answers. Making a believable three-dimensional painting can be done with just that, right? So if you're going to make something frictionless, right, it's either you have a 50-50 chance, even if you guess, if all the questions are A, B, multiple choice. And if you have even a little bit of knowledge, it's almost impossible to get it wrong. And so the
Absolutely.
entire program is broken down that way so that is frictionless. There's no place to really get tripped up. There's knowledge, which is how something works, and then the application, which is taking the paint from the palette and putting it onto the canvas based on that understanding. And everything is one little nibble at a time, right?
That's so
You-
beautiful.
yeah, I say, like, anybody. I think everybody, at least in this country, knows or is, well, let me first, guys, women know guys like this, and every guy is either this guy or is friends with this guy. At some point, will take, like, say, a hamburger and shove the entire hamburger into their mouth and nearly choke to death on it, right? It's amazing that we survive, but like every guy is either that guy or knows that guy, right?
Right.
And it's just what it is you put too much in your mouth, you can't even chew it, and then it's hard to even spit out, right?
Mhm.
And you could literally choke to death on it. And that's how a lot of education is offered. So
Yeah.
much information, and it's not, you don't have enough time to chew it and swallow it and digest it before the next piece of data comes in. So you're still kind of awkward with idea 1 when 2 and 3 are stacked on top. And so now you're trying to juggle things and you're on a unicycle, and now they're throwing things at you and spraying water, and then, and it's like there's clowns in the background, and it's sadly a lot of education is like that. And
I
if you could just
completely
quiet the
agree
room,
with that.
yeah, if you could just quiet the room, here's one morsel.
Yeah.
Chew it, break it down, swallow it, digest it. Good? Okay. Here's the second morsel. Do the same. And just very, very slowly stack. Now, the drawback to that is that it can be very slow. So
Mhm.
in order for an education like that to be successful, the things that each piece that is chewed and digested must have powerful impact. So if you can change, if you do your initial thing and you break down images from dark and light instead and break them down to shadow and light, it has a very powerful impact. Understanding that there are two types of edges, sharp ones and faded ones or blended ones. And if you understand how to use them, you can create three-dimensional objects instantaneously. And if you put them where they go, a painting might only have three or four, and it goes from being completely flat to being completely three-dimensional. It's like the power of understanding an underlying principle. And so the program that I've built has like four of these things, four very, very powerful, but simply broken down core skills. And then you just do a couple of rote exercises to really kind of digest them, to settle in before the next one is given to you. The idea is to juggle one knife at a time. When you're done with that one, put it down and then pick the next one up. You're much more likely to keep all your fingers that way. And that creates the frictionless education.
I love this because what I'm hearing you say is that when we break things down, our brains are very complex and they can handle a lot of things. Sometimes it's like when you send a little kid into their room and you say, go clean up your room. Well, little kid sees this gigantic mess and you don't even know where to start and they get overwhelmed. And so they come back
Mhm,
out, and 20 minutes later, you're like, hey, your room's still dirty. What's happened? How come you haven't picked up your room? Is they don't know where to start. And I often explain writing like this as well. Writing is very similar. Writing has a lot of different skills in it. So, writing has thinking skills, it has what am I going to
mhm,
say? And it has what are the words I'm going to use to say that, the right words? And then
mhm,
how do they go in an order that makes sense? And then there's grammar, there's spelling, there's the physical aspect, the mechanics of the writing. And all of that goes into writing. So, when we say our 5-year-old is upset because he doesn't like to write anymore, let's take a step back a little bit
mhm.
and talk about that because there's a lot of things in there. So breaking those things down is helpful. That seems very overwhelming to a parent, but it also is very when you can do that, the confidence that they get that everything can be broken down in a way
Once you
like
learn,
that.
once you know what, part of it is once you see an education broken down that is
Yes.
frictionless,
Yes.
when you go and look for an education in something else, you look at how it's done, you're like, whoa, this is not managed well. Had I not seen a good education functioning, I might have believed this was okay. Right. So
Yeah.
a good example. So like I said, I grew up in the Bronx. I viewed my world through a coffee straw. I had no idea what the rest of the world looked like. I just thought that the rest of the world, I mean, there was stuff on TV, but the TV shows all happen inside someone's house.
Right.
It's like you're not out in the street doing stuff. So I just thought that the rest of the world was very much like where I lived, only neater and less gunfire. And so and so for me, when I got to a place where I could move out, I just moved to another neighborhood in the Bronx that wasn't nearly as dangerous. And it wasn't until I got married that I moved out to New Jersey, where there is no concrete and there's I live in a town that's 20 years ago was almost entirely farms, and it's wonderful. I'm an hour from New York. I'm an hour from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, but I get to live in a really, really nice, quiet place. And but I didn't even know this existed. The world that my kids grew up in, I couldn't have even fathomed that it existed when I was 20 years old. At 20, and I'm not a dumb guy, but I had no perspective. And so if you haven't ever seen what a good coach can do, you don't know what a good coach is.
So
You know,
true.
like for me, I wrestled. My coach was a New Jersey state champ. He had been trained like his whole life, from like 7 years old, and he had really good coaches. And so I lucked out. He set a very different standard for me.
Right.
I understood what good training looked like. I've done a lot of other things. After that, I studied jujitsu. I box. I like combat sports. And I've gone to gyms and it's like, I'll work out one time and I'm like, this is not a place of learning. I'll go find someplace else because the standard is set.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of the time we think that something is a good education until we see what a really good education in that thing really looks like. And then it's like, oh, then when we try to do something else, our expectation of how the information is broken down and disseminated and delivered and then tested It's different. Our standards change. And if we're doing the teaching ourselves, even the books that we teach from, what like does this book break down the information in a way that makes sense? Einstein said that if you can't explain something so that a 5-year-old understands it, you don't actually understand it yourself. And I think like if you use that standard, if you measure every education, whether it's a book you're going to teach from or an education that you're going to get like we offer at Evolve, measure the education against that standard. So I would say a 5-year-old doesn't have the coordination to do the stuff we do. But if I informed a 5-year-old about the first thing that we do when we start to make art, and then I prompted them and asked a question, is this a shadow or a light? They could answer and get 100% every single time. I have to tell my students all the time, my adult students, you're thinking too hard. You're
Right.
doing calculus, and I'm asking for basic adding. Keep it simple. If you are having to really engage your brain and think hard, you're doing something wildly wrong. Everything here is designed around the mental processing of a child. And it took a long time to get there, to get to a place where, it's not perfect. The program, the Evolve program, is in its 18th iteration because it's never good enough. There's always another way to take something that's this big and cut it in half.
Right,
Oh,
absolutely.
and it's
Yeah.
like, and for me, my students have taught me where that is. I've had
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of students in the schools and online, and really the greatest part of my education has come from teaching.
Mhm.
I think I know how something works, and then I try to explain it, and I get a vacant stare from my student. They have no idea what I'm
Mhm.
talking about. And it's like, so I have a firm belief as a teacher, if I have a student that is putting in an earnest effort, they cannot fail. I can fail because I haven't explained it in a way they understand. That's my job as a teacher, is to break it down in such a way that the student in front of me who's putting in the effort gets the information and in a usable way. And
Yeah, what I
so,
Oh, go ahead.
um, and so for me, any time that I have a student who I say something and I send them off and they come back and it's wrong, again, if it's one student, it's like, well, okay, like maybe they didn't understand. I don't have to change what I'm doing. But if I start to see a pattern of people getting jammed up, 10, 12, 15% of my students are getting caught up in this place, I have to find a way to break this information into more pieces. Smaller ones, easier to chew, easier to swallow, easier to digest. And I've been doing that now for 15 years with the online, well, with the
Yeah.
education we offer here.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I hear you saying there too is that is that as parents, because as a homeschool parent, we're like, I'm not a teacher. I can't do that. I don't know what to do. But you're not necessarily, you weren't trained to be a teacher either. What you've done is you've taken and you said, okay, that part's not working. Let's seek some new information. Let's figure out how the brain works. Let's figure out how this works. Let's see how we can break it down a little bit deeper. And I love that constant state of reiteration, that constant state of metacognition where you're thinking about how you're thinking, how things are happening, and
Mhm.
that's how improvement gets made. That's what I help parents do all the time is in coaching them to create this culture where we're developing high level love of learning and then keeping it there. That requires a constant state of renegotiating what we're thinking about and how our brains work and what's our culture like and what we can do better. And that is doable, as that's what we do always as parents, is we're thinking about that in that way of how we can be better for our kids. And when kids learn in this way, when they learn that, oh, I've learned something that I didn't think I could learn, that seemed really hard. And I learned it in this way where actually I was just walked right through, and it doesn't take necessarily a formal curriculum to do that. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about really taking something to where it seems hard and looking at it and saying, how do I break this down even further for my students? And if you can't, then get some help on that. But if you if kids go through that system, they know, "Oh my gosh, I can do that with anything." Now I know how to learn. I know how to take something that seems super big, and I can find a resource, find a mentor, find a teacher, find a coach, find a book, and I can learn that thing. That creates such confidence throughout our lives. I know you've done that with your students, and have you seen that in your students apply that in other areas of their life? Because I know what they come out with you is incredible. And
Yeah.
and so how do they apply that to the rest of their life? That confidence that they just received.
Well, I think that once you have confidence in one thing, you understand how it's achieved in all things, right? And so competence is powerful, right?
Mhm.
Like you think about it, like if I asked you to get up on stage in front of 1,000 people and talk about the migration patterns of the humpback whale, and then turned on the cameras and the lights, like you would stammer up there. You wouldn't know what to say. But if I put you up on stage in front of 1,000 people to speak about a topic you're intimately aware of, you know the ins and outs, you don't need any notes. Yeah, you might be a little bit nervous for a moment, but once you got into it, you would forget that you were nervous because you know what you're doing. You're competent and you're skilled, and you know that what you have to say has value, not
Mhm.
just coming out of your own mouth and going to your ears, but to the people in the room. And I think that what I find is that the students that come in here, and we have a broad range of students. The students that come in here, as they develop these skills, they start to realize. So, first of all, when you come into the school looks like a museum. We only hang artwork on the walls by students under the age of 18. And we do that for a reason. Um, I I like to showcase what we do with students who are uneducated. They come in, they know nothing. If I have a student who's 50 years old, well, they could have been studying art for 30 years, and then I just tweaked a few things. But here we have paintings anywhere from like 12 to 18 years old. And it is very hard to get up on the walls. We have multiple international award-winning students celebrated. And so when you first walk into the school, this seems impossible. You just got to see the looks on these kids' faces like, I am in the wrong place. And I tell them, every one of them, kind of go through stuff. And at the end of the day, I say to them, look around the room, look at what's up on the walls. And I want you to remember how you feel right now, how impossible this seems. A year from now, when you're doing this, I'm going to ask you to remember how this feels right now, because what happens is these students come in and they produce incredible work as they develop their skills. Their work becomes incredible, but in this space they feel average. This school is very humbling. Um, even internationally recognized students that come through my school feel normal and average in this space because everybody is producing at this level. And so what I want them to do is when they get to a place where I can say to them, look at this painting you're doing that you're like, oh, it's not coming together. It's not doing what I want. And I can show you that it's as good as something that's up on the walls already, that your standards are just insane right now, which is not a bad thing, but that your standards are just outpacing what you can do. I want you to remember that a year ago or 18 months ago, you didn't even believe what you're doing now is possible.
Right.
And if you clear a hurdle like that, wow,
Huge.
I went from
Transformational.
thinking this was impossible to being right in the middle or even at the front of the pack of people doing this. And it wasn't that hard. I know how I did it. I came in and I cut no corners. Good enough was never good enough. I had to be the best I could do it. That's the thing we do. Perfect is not what we shoot for. The best you can do each time you sit down. That's it. Some days you're going to have a lot of energy and a lot of focus, and other days you won't. You deliver the best you can so that no matter what the work looks like, you can be proud of the effort you put in. If you do that, the pressure goes away.
Mhm.
The pressure, oh, this painting didn't work out. Well, so what? Did you work hard? Did you deliver the best you could today? You did? There's nothing to be ashamed of in that. And there's nothing to be upset about. Yeah, the painting is an after effect. Don't care about the painting. Eventually, everything you touch, even on your worst days, will be professional in nature, right? But while you're learning, no pressure. The best you can deliver That's all we ask. And if you do that, I can promise you the results. And I think that's in all things. Eliminate the pressure. Again, the grades. You have a test coming, you have this, you have that. Did you do the best you can? Some students take longer than others to figure it out. I have a student that came in here years ago. Um, she came in, I let her come into the school 1 year. Usually we start at 7. I let her come in at 6 years old. Her parents begged me. And this student, for the first maybe 5 or 6 years she was here, I could easily say she was the worst student I ever had. Every month she would come back in, and I would be stunned that her parents were bringing her in and paying for another month. I marveled at it, but I encouraged. I just for myself, I couldn't believe that they kept showing up. By the time she graduated high school, she was one of the best students in the school, top 2 or 3, and probably top 10 ever in the 15 years the school's been here. And she just never got deterred because there was never any negatives attached. She showed up and did the best she could every day. She was distracted and she was heavy-handed and she was all of these things that made it challenging. But she never got deterred because nobody ever leaned on her and said, like, "What are you doing here? Like, this looks terrible." The question was always, "Did you do the best you could today?" Excellent. Good. I'll see you
I
next
hope you
week.
guys are hearing this culture that he's talking about. So, this is the culture that I talk about all the time and that I teach how you can develop somebody who wants to come back, somebody who and eventually will own their own education because she owned it eventually, or she wouldn't have created what she did and she wouldn't have been the best student. She
Yeah.
had to own that at some point. And so, that culture that supports that is so important, and it builds that confidence that I can do this. I can do this. And for you moms that are thinking about how this is so overwhelming, it's because it seems, I mean, Kevin's been in this a long time. I've been in this a long time. I know exactly what he's talking about. I've been teaching for a long, long time. And Kevin's been teaching for just as long as or longer. But what I'm saying is that if it seems overwhelming, learn it together. I can't even tell you how many times I took last 2 years ago, Kenyon and I read Euclid, who is the father of geometry. So we read his Greek translated, his book, Euclid Elements. We read book 1. And it was so intimidating for me, not being a quote unquote math person. And I felt like I don't know, man, we're gonna figure this out. And Kenyon didn't have a lot of that math base either. So, but we figured it out together. And what we felt in that accomplishment, that we were figuring out something that was hard because we broke it down together, was so empowering. And it really gave us the idea that, hey, man, if we could read Euclid, we could do anything. And that's the same idea of what Kevin is talking about right now. So don't feel like you have to be the expert, you have to be the person that knows how to break everything down. You just have to do it together. And if you can't figure it out, then you can get outside information, of course, from people that do, and get that great education thing that he was talking about. And Kevin, I want to make sure that we don't leave today because our time is up, but I don't want to leave today without making sure that people know how to get in touch with you and know how to get your masterclass that they're able to view for free on your website. So, can you please share with us how to get in touch with you and how we can look at that masterclass? Because I know I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So we have a landing page for your audience. It's evolve, like evolution, evolveartist.com/slash HS. And there's an 8-minute video there, which I talked about earlier, which is it's a wonderful way to see an abbreviated breakdown of exactly how a painting is constructed. And people watch it and they're like, okay, and what else? Because I know there's a ton of other stuff. And it's like, no, that's it. You have to do exercises to develop each stage, but that's it. There is nothing else. And so, but that landing page, it'll have other resources and access to a pretty lengthy live class that I do. And so, but that's the place to go. Yeah, I wanted to add something if I could take like another two
Please
minutes.
go ahead.
So another thing in education, and I think it's not just education, but it's in all things in life. I find that expectations are one of the most damaging things to in they stunt growth. And from the standpoint of somebody teaching somebody else, when you write expectations, again, you think about like road rage, you get in your car, you're driving. Why do people start getting all bent out of shape and screaming at each other? And well, they got in the car and they were 6 minutes to their destination, and now they're stuck in 20 minutes of traffic. It's not the 20 minutes of traffic, but the expectation that I was supposed to be there already. I have things to do, and I was supposed to be there already. And it's the expectation that creates the frustration. And f- uh, if you're frustrated, you're not in a learning environment. You're not in a learning space. Whether you're the frustrated teacher or the frustrated student, you're not going to learn or be able to teach in that space. And so, expectations, being able to manage them, right? If you have an idea of how long it should take for somebody to learn something, and you're say you think it's going to take an hour, and you're 3 hours in, and it's easy to start being like, "How are you not getting this? I've explained this 12 times." That's the end of any chance that that's going to be learned. And it's
Absolutely.
like putting those expectations aside and letting the thing, you'll find out after the student has learned how long it takes for that student to learn that thing. Not everybody learns at the same speed, and not everybody learns different things, right? There are more analytical, mathematical, or creative that you could learn very quickly in a creative space, but not well or not quickly in a mathematical space. And it's like, we're all different. We're all different, and what we have to offer, every person is going to offer different things to the world, and it's so easy to be cut off from those things that we have to offer if we're being taught by somebody who doesn't have the patience to allow us to grow at our own speed. Now that, of course, the student has to be putting in an earnest effort, but we know our kids, right? I know my students here, but we know our kids, and so that's a very big thing. If you find yourself getting frustrated, like for me, I do it from time to time. I step away from a student and I compose myself because I don't want them to see my frustration. And so, but anyway, but that's a very big thing that I've found
No,
in
this is
teaching.
huge. And if you've been listening to me for a while, if you've been following this podcast, you know that I talk about the educational should. So that's what I call it. It's the very same thing you're talking about. It's that
Yeah.
expectations that are put on us by ourselves and our society and everything else, and our mother-in-laws maybe. But the but the idea that there are shoulds that should be happening, and it impedes the progress, and it creates learning expectations that are negative, and just like you said, it stops progress. So I am really happy that you mentioned that. That is something that I teach all the time. And so make sure that you go to that website. It's listed in wherever you're watching or listening to this. You will be able to get that website for Kevin's masterclass, that 8-minute video he was talking about, and other resources and ways to contact him. I recommend going there and checking that out, because this is something you can give to your kids if they're art forward and their interest is in art, or even if they just want to dabble and give them a different experience. That is something I think is really valuable for them. It can help them with their confidence and their learning journey in how to learn. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us today, and I really really appreciate your perspectives, and we have so much in philosophical educational common there. I didn't use those words in correct order, but hey, whatever. And we will talk to you guys again next week.